Greetings, I'm Dr. Ken Hildebrand. We're here with Professor Noam Chomsky of MIT, the world's most quoted living author. And the reason why I bring that up is because how many times have you seen him on corporate television with all these corporate programs we have on TV all the time? Well, I haven't seen him on there very often. Then again, I don't watch TV too much. So what I want to talk about today, Noam, is the myth of the liberal media. That you have CNN and MSNBC on the one hand and Fox News on the other hand. And people don't really realize that. Well, I want you to go ahead and you tell us what you think about the liberal media.
Well, my good friend and co-author, Edward Herman, has a book called The Myth of the Liberal Media, in which he exposes the liberal media, dissects them, and so on. Actually, I agree with his analysis, but I don't entirely agree with his conclusion. I think those are the liberal media. If you look at the spectrum of permissible discussion in the United States, it's pretty narrow.
That's important, yeah.
But it goes from what's called conservative to liberal, and that's the liberal media. The liberal media are deep in the pockets of the corporate sector, very closely linked to the government. They're sometimes mildly critical. They regard themselves as very independent and adversarial and so on. And I've heard media leaders talking proudly about how they stand up courageously against power and so on, and are tribunes of the people, and I think they really believe it. But if you look at what they're doing, it conforms very closely to the structure of to what the demands of the system of concentrated power. In fact, if you go to journalism schools, most of them teach a concept of objectivity. It's very important for journalists to be objective, and they have a definition of objectivity. If something is agreed by Democrats and Republicans, and you report it, you're being objective. If you question it, you're being biased. But within the spectrum, Democrat, Republican, you're allowed to take a stand in one position or another. But try to get outside that spectrum, and that's a definition of bias. As long as you stay within it, it's a definition of objective.
Right.
So I agree that these are the liberal media, and that's a description of American liberalism.
There seems to be a few topics that they just don't discuss fairly. I mean, the United States leads the world in prisoners and in total number and in prisoners per capita. We have some 800,000 arrests for possession of a plant every year. And meanwhile, some 800,000 kids go missing. Obviously, they would be catching more of these, finding more of the perpetrators that are abducting these kids if they weren't chasing people for possession of a plant. And they're not making that real. They're not making real that we could use hemp seed oil to satisfy a great deal of our energy needs right now. Well, here we are right after the tsunami in Japan. And of course, elections. Neither side is really being fair about those. They're limiting us to two choices. So we have the hemp and the cannabis and the elections.
Well, all of these are examples of how the media are being objective in their technical sense. They're staying within the framework of the Republican-Democratic agreement. So we have, when you say two candidates, even that's misleading. We basically have one candidate, the business candidate. The only question is which of the business candidates are we going to get? So take, say, the 2008 election, which was supposed to represent a wide spectrum, won by Obama. He barely won, and he won at the end because he outspent McCain. So where was he getting the money from? He was getting it from the financial institutions. They preferred him to McCain. They thought he'd be better for them than McCain was. And they're, by now, basically the core of the economy. 2007, they had maybe 40% of corporate profit. which is pretty harmful for the economy, but, you know, very rich for them. In fact, if you take a look at inequality in the United States, it's known to be very high, but what is less recognized is that the inequality is primarily because of the extraordinary concentration of wealth in a fraction of 1% of the population.
Right.
1/10 of 1%, in fact.
Right.
Well, that's hedge managers, CEOs of major corporations, mostly financial corporations, and so on. So that's like the core of the economy, and hence the core of political power, because the two go along together when elections are basically bought. Anyhow, they preferred Obama. They poured a lot of money in. He was able to swing the election, and they expected to be paid back.
Right.
And they were.
Right.
The first thing Obama had to do was pick an economic team. There were a big economic crisis. Who did he pick? He went to Robert Rubin, you know, the sort of Wall Street guru, you know, and he picked him and his men. Lawrence Summers, Timothy Geithner, and others. In fact, what he picked was the people who were pretty much responsible for the crisis.
Yeah.
And there are other eminent economists, you know, Nobel laureates and so on, who say Joseph Stiglitz, Paul Krugman, and others, not left, right in, you know, pretty much mainstream, but critical of the behavior of the architects of the economic crisis, the banks and investment firms. They were out totally. Well, that's the beginning of the payback of the financial institutions for having put him into power. And then if you take a look at the policies they came up with, there was a small stimulus, but pretty small, in fact, way below what it should have been. The stimulus, in fact, the total stimulus is practically flat to zero, because the federal stimulus just about compensated for the decline in spending at the state and local level. So government stimulus was essentially zero, and it was not enough to lift the economy out of the doldrums. On the other hand, it was a huge bailout for the criminals.
The bankers.
You know, I mean, they're doing fine. They're richer and more powerful than they ever were. In fact, right in the midst of about a couple of weeks ago, right at the same time that you're reading in the business press that 20% of Americans now qualify for food stamps, right at that point, that Goldman Sachs, probably the main culprit in the economic crisis and royally bailed out by the taxpayer, they announced quietly I think, $17.5 billion compensation package for executives. Tripling of the base salary for the CEO, Lloyd Blankfein, and I think a special $12.5 million gift to him. That's right in the middle of this. And these are people who were just paid up, saved from destruction by the taxpayer. Right. And it's not the first time. It happens over and over.
Why do you suppose that the Republicans or the right-wing, extreme right-wing media criticizes him for this bailout?
Well, that's tongue-in-cheek. You know. They criticize him for everything.
They do.
Yeah, I mean, if he was walking on the left-hand side of the street, they'd criticize him for that.
Well, they even claim that he's a socialist, that with this health care plan, and really, like, the public option was kept off the table completely.
Over the objection of about almost 2/3 of the population.
Unbelievable.
He could have pushed it through, but that would mean responding to public concerns. Right. And there's higher concerns like the insurance industry. So, in fact, you know, the healthcare reform maybe improved things a little, but it did not touch the core of the problem. No. The core of the problem is that the U.S. healthcare system is totally dysfunctional. Yeah. It's about twice the per capita costs of comparable countries, some of the worst outcomes. And if you look at the famous deficit, if we had the same kind of healthcare system that comparable countries have, there'd be a surplus. Mm. But you can't touch that, because there you're going back to the financial institutions. Now, they never get enough, of course, so no matter how much they're given, they want more. And the Republicans are basically, they're flacks. I mean, they criticize the bailout, but that's appealing to their base. They want to appeal to a base which says the government shouldn't do anything. Of course, they think the government ought to do everything. It's just like Ronald Reagan. He appealed to the base saying that government is the problem, not the solution.
Right.
At the same time, he increased the size of government. Most protectionist president in American history. Intervened massively in the economy to support wealth and power. Like for example, his Star Wars program. I don't know what he thought. Maybe he was watching movies or something. But it was sold to the business community just as a gift. Here's another gift from the government for high-tech industry, and it was even sold to allies that way, like Japan and Germany. And so he was a big believer in a powerful interventionist state. But the slogan is, government, get the government off our backs. And the Republicans are in a somewhat difficult position, remember. They are the slaves of corporate power, slavish subservience. At the same time, the top 1/10 of the 1% of the population is not enough to vote you into office.
So they have to deceive
So you have to
people.
somehow get people to follow you. And there's several ways of doing it. One way is to appeal to the Christian right, which is a substantial element in the country.
Right.
And if you can appeal to their interests, you say, okay, let's stop abortion or whatever it may be, you pick up a lot of votes.
Wouldn't they have done that when they had both houses of Congress and the presidency and the judiciary, if they really wanted to stop abortion? They have no intention of doing that.
The CEOs don't, the rich and powerful don't care. Their wives and daughters are going to get abortion no matter what the law.
Well, they've used this as a ploy to get people onto their winning, and yet they've had both houses of Congress, and they had the presidency, and they had the judiciary, and they never did anything about
Because
it.
the public doesn't want it. There's a segment of the public that wants it passionately.
Right.
And in fact, where they're in power, they're introducing it. Like in, I think, South Dakota.
Right.
They're ramming it through in one way or another.
Right.
But they can't really stop it. It would be unconstitutional. And they also, there's a big, a large majority of women, for example, would be outraged by it. So they can't really push it through, but they can use it as red meat to throw to the constituency. The same with the claim that they're in favor of small government. They claim to be in favor of small government, get the government off our backs, but the financial industries, which are the core of the economy, they're the most heavily subsidized component of the economy. They're subsidized by this government insurance policy that they get too big to fail. So you make risky investments and transactions, you make a lot of money, you get into trouble, and you run to the taxpayer, he bails you out. And you're richer than ever. They claim to be opposed to that, but they're the strongest ones in favor of it. And you can see it when you get to policy. So when you get to policy, after all the bailout, it was started by Bush and Paulson. And when you get to the regulatory system, there are some attempts, the Dodd-Frank bill to try to impose some discipline into the regulatory system. But who's trying to kill it? The Republicans. They don't want a regulatory system.
Getting back to the top 1% of income earners.
Top 1/10 of 1%.
Right, you're right. And I think that probably there should be another subcategory at this point. Because, I heard on the news, on the radio when I was coming through New Jersey. Now this had to do with New Jersey's taxation. And they were saying, well, the top 1% is paying, like, I forget, it was 41 or 43% of the overall tax. And this is what they throw out to people all the time. They don't throw out to people, how do they make their money? Either Earth's resources or human labor. Now, that's, how else do they get, we're not importing either one of those from Mars.
Well, not everybody is a tax dodger. So somebody pays taxes. And of course it's going to, the fact that this figure that they're throwing out is a reflection of the concentration of income. Since income is so radically skewed to the very rich, there's going to be, they'll pay most of the taxes, naturally.
Right.
That's a reflection of, even if we had a flat tax, that would be true. If you want to know more about what's going on, Read the front page of the New York Times today. They have a good story for once on General Electric, the biggest corporation in the country. They've got profits bulging out of their pockets. They're paying zero taxes. In fact, they're getting a rebate.
Now, Senator Gravel blamed them and the Democratic Party for keeping him out of the debates. It was because General Electric owned MSNBC, and it was MSNBC who censored him from the debates. So here you don't hear about a guy who helped end the Vietnam War by reading the Pentagon Papers in front of the Senate. So they really, I mean, people seem so frustrated nowadays.
They are. The population's frustrated.
I think that's where the Tea Party comes in, but it's misguided.
And they appeal to, they themselves are a small sector of the population, relatively affluent, nativist, small town businessmen and so on.
Yeah.
But they've been there for a long time, that sector. But by now they have an appeal to a much broader sector that's really angry and frustrated and doesn't know what to do. So let's take it out on, they hate everything. Hate the Democrats, hate the Republicans, hate the banks, hate the government, hate scientists, whatever it is, we hate it. And that can be mobilized by concentrated power to get their way on what matters. And they're doing it.
You know, I wrote something recently, and I just said that, we have this more prisoners than anybody else. One of our leading crimes is possession of a plant. Recently I had helicopters flying over my property and adjacent people, and they got, they found some people for growing marijuana, and obviously they weren't growing it on their own property, so who knows who was doing it, but that was an awful expenditure. And, the average person thinks, well, what can I do? Okay, we could be using hemp seed oil, to handle a great deal of our energy needs. And we know, if it could reduce some of these nuclear power plants, wouldn't that be wonderful? And there's these solutions, and they're censored by the media. And I suggested what I think is when people say we need a revolution, I just find that extremely impractical. I don't think that that's going to happen. But an informed revolution, if people could just inform one another, and something has to happen. No, we're not on a very good course. You wrote to me recently saying that it's just surreal.
We're going off a cliff. And there has been the first major reaction. What happened in Wisconsin,
right?
Ohio and Indiana, that was pretty surprising. In Wisconsin, there were tens of thousands of people on the streets for a long time, occupying the state capitol. They lost in the legislature, but they reached, about probably 2/3 of the population of Wisconsin supported them. It was rammed through by, the Koch brothers and the governor trying to spearhead an attack on the last remaining labor unions. It had nothing to do with the deficit, but it had to do with the fact that organized labor remains a barrier to complete corporate tyranny, so they want to wipe it out. And unfortunately, did you hear a word from Obama about this? No. Because the Democrats more or less support it.
When in the research for my book, I found that a lot of the candidates, the Democratic candidates, were hogging up the PAC money, the corporate money.
If you want to be in the political game now, you have to be in the pocket of the corporations. That's what happens when elections are bought.
Right.
Since the 70s, the price of winning a seat has just skyrocketed. And you can pretty well predict who's going to win just by looking at campaign spending.
But that's where I say, if we could inform people, this since this is the 10th time we've met up, actually. And, I've said that my personal opinion is that I think we should go for these third-party or independent people who are, I don't know if there was a big difference between Obama and McCain getting in there. Maybe we would have invaded Iran. I don't know how much worse it would have been with McCain. So really, but we keep drawing the line. They keep drawing the line further and further to the right, and we keep going along with them. And
Well, because they have the system locked up. They have the system. You can't run an independent candidate. It's almost impossible. For one thing, you need a ton. Either you need a huge amount of popular support.
The support effort, right.
Well, you know, to get
Effort
that,
can overcome
to
bugs.
get, you know, to overcome the concentration of wealth, which is a real job.
Right.
And you got to work on that. But if you don't have that, then there's no way to run in a campaign unless you're corporate funded.
You need the mass effort.
And even with that, by now Ralph Nader's talked about this, the gerrymandering of electoral districts has gone so far that most of them are just locked up.
Well, it would have to be a completely overwhelming victory,
It
I
would
think.
really have to be overwhelming.
Otherwise, it just wouldn't happen.
And that requires massive organization.
I mean, it seems...
In fact, part of the reason for going after the last remaining unions with such a frenzy is that they are the core of the possibility of organizing. So you got to get rid of them.
Yeah.
Get an atomized population where maybe everybody's frustrated and angry, but they don't know what to do.
Well, they were complaining on the radio broadcast I was hearing about, well, these ones want benefits and this and that, and I mean, everybody had benefits 20 years ago. It's just like this wealth is concentrated up there, and then they keep having to do
they're
away
not
with.
complaining about the benefits that Goldman Sachs is giving to its executives.
Yeah.
That you keep quiet about. What you focus on is the fact that teachers don't have to starve after they retire.
Yeah.
Well, that's good propaganda.
Wow. It could be a better world. I just hope that we start taking some steps in that direction.
No, really, you take a look at the Republicans. The Republicans in Congress are interesting. In the House, I mean, they're not going to get their will. I don't think it'll be blocked, but it's interesting what they want. So right now, for example, you take a look at science, for example. I mean, science and technology are the hope for the economy of the future. Forget the benefits. You're not going to have a functioning economy if you don't have a lot of science and technology. That's where the modern economy comes from, and it will in the future too. They want to destroy it. They're cutting back funding on the basic parts of the government that are right at the core of funding scientific innovation and development and training and so on. They get rid of it.
And that's another thing with hemp. That's another solution. I mean, here they got us involved in NAFTA and the World Trade Organization. We lost all these jobs. Then they look down on these people who don't have any employment. What are they going to do? I mean, hemp is something else that could also be a shot in the arm. How can they withhold a solution?
Well, but take green technology.
Yeah.
I mean, if there's going to be a solution to the energy crisis, it's going to be in solar power and so on. Well, Americans are investing in solar power, but they're investing in it in China, not here.
I'll have to give you some things on the hemp seed oil. It's really promising, and plus all the other products with that too.
Well, one of the sectors of the science community that's being cut back, that the Republicans want to cut back, is the funding for biotechnology. Turning cellulose into, useless cellulose into usable fuel. They want to stop that.
Right. Well, what do you think's going to happen? I mean, what happened in Japan, we can't afford many more accidents like that.
Right. When this was happening in Japan, Obama authorized more nuclear plants, went to Chile and made a deal for nuclear energy.
And then the disaster in the Gulf, and they don't seem to be that concerned about offshore drilling. And it just amazes me. I remember that Hume stated centuries ago that nothing appears more surprising to those who consider human affairs with a philosophical eye than the easiness with which the many are governed by the few. So are you in agreement that most Americans are being misled here at the height of the information age?
That's what he said. He said it's because of the power of what we call propaganda. He didn't call it that.
But we have the internet now. I mean, that's our tool.
It's a
Could
tool,
be.
but it could be, but, I mean, the internet is only a tool if you know how to use it. Like, for example, you could walk into the Harvard Library and learn tons of things if you know what you're looking for. If you don't know what you're looking for, it's just chaos. And the
Right.
internet is just that magnified.
There has to be some
It
organization.
has to be organized, structured, there has to be a framework that you develop, and that comes out of education and organization.
Right.
When individuals just go into the internet alone, they often end up with completely crazy views. You don't know what to evaluate.
There has to be, yeah, it has to be organized. Has to be some kind of community organization along with the internet. But otherwise, they're gonna try to take the internet away from us, and then we're not gonna have that.
They may not even take it away, because the point is it's just chaos as long as you have an atomized population. If they can take away organization, interaction, talking to your neighbors and so on, leave people isolated and alone, you can throw the internet at them and they can't do anything with it.
Right, right. Hey, Noam, thanks so much.
Okay, yeah.
It's always a pleasure.